Okay, good afternoon, everybody. How's Global Summit so far for everybody? All good? You enjoying it? Wonderful. So this is a kind of a new format for us. It's a 20-minute session, so only half of what the other sessions are, so you have more time to consume more sessions. Wonderful, right? So I'm going to be quick and brief. My name is Stefan Wittmann. I'm a product manager working out of Germany, so if I speak funny, let me know. This session, we're going to talk a little bit about a new cloud service that we're announcing actually this week. So we actually will hear about this tomorrow during the keynote, and I'm going to give you a little preview. We're calling it the InterSystems Iris Cloud Document, basically very similar to what we already have live, which is InterSystems Iris Cloud SQL, a service offering the SQL capabilities of Iris, and this is an offering for the document model capabilities that we have. In the session, we're going to have a quick rundown of what actually is a document inside the document model, how do you interact with documents in general, how do you query that data, and then we're going to have a really brief rundown of what the service actually looks like and how you can get your hands on it. Getting started, obviously, first of all, definitions. What is a document? In general, a document always comes with a couple of pieces. First of all, it contains named value pairs or objects or arrays. These are basically the key components of what a document is composed of, and they're typical hierarchical, so you can nest these structures in itself. Here's an example of what a document looks like in JSON notation. So it comes with all three examples: a named value pair, an object, and an array. This is what people typically think about when they hear the name document, but just to be clear, this is a document as well. This is an XML document. XML and JSON are just serializations for what a document structure actually is. So typically, somebody says, oh, I have a JSON document, right? But just keep in mind, a document in general is a concept, and JSON and XML are just serializations of the same data structure, okay? So when are you actually using a document structure? What are the benefits of it? First of all, a document structure lets you make use of the engine in a very flexible way. You don't have to define a schema up front. It's a late binding to the schema. If you compare this to relational, in relational you have to define a schema up front before you load your data. That's not true for a document model. You can just insert and ingest your data without defining your schema. Some people say it's schema free. That's not really true, because there's always a schema, right? The engine in the back end will always build a schema so that you can actually access all of the properties that are loaded. It just happens at runtime when you ingest the data, okay? It's really good for sparse scenarios. So if you have documents that sometimes have properties defined and others don't, that's the scenario in relational, where basically you see a column where all of the rows are empty except for one. That's a sparse scenario. Relational can be good at it, maybe sometimes, maybe not, depends on the scenario. Documents typically are optimized for sparse scenarios, so that's a really good use case. It contains hierarchical data structures, so you can nest elements, which can be a pro and a con at the same time. And it includes dynamic typing. So the same property path across different documents can actually have different types, which is something that's difficult to model in relational structures. So typical use cases is when you want or have to accept unknown or unplanned data. When you're working in an environment where the schema is changing very often, like in an agile environment, then you can do schema migration at a very low cost, but also the cost comes in a different way. You have to update your code differently and write defensive code, because you don't know what the schema might look like in a day or in 2 years. So your code needs to be much more defensive, because you have to do the validation on the application level, and the backend is not doing that for you. If you have fluid data types, that's a really good use case. And if users are going to expand the data set, if they're going to expand the schema, that's also typically a very good use case. Another structure that we need to talk about is the containers. How do you store documents? And typically that's a container that's commonly referred to as a collection in the industry. And we are sticking to the same term here. So the collection is the container for multiple documents. You can group them. And just for the fun of it, a collection by itself is a document as well, just an array of documents. If you want to have some, if you're coming from the relational world, then I think this mapping is very useful. If you think about a table, that's typically a collection on the document side. If you think about a column, that's a key. If you think about a value, well, that's a value. And if you think about a row, then that's a document, an entity. Okay, so that's a very helpful correlation. Taking a brief look at relational versus document, if you want to, let's say, store a patient and work with that patient, that data might be structured across multiple tables. And if you want to retrieve that data, that includes a SQL query that needs to join all of these tables together in order to retrieve that, that single entity. In the document world, you can basically generate a document which is hierarchical, so includes all of these subtables directly embedded and nested inside this document. And that means that one physical read of a document gives you the complete set of data that you actually need. So that can be very effective, very efficient. But it also means you always get the full document, right? In the relational world, when everything is normalized, you can pick what you want. In the document, you pick the document as it was stored. There's no way to say, I only want this subset of a document. So that's something that you need to have in mind when you're designing your documents at storage time. When you ingest your data, you actually need to think about read and access patterns of your data. That's quite important. So comparing things, the relational model in general takes care of the validation. That's a quick, a very important pro. That's something in the document world that you have to do on your application code. So in general, your application code needs to be very defensive, and you need to check, hey, is there a property of a certain type? Is it an object? Is it nested? Then I'm going to take a look at that substructure. If it's literal, then I'm just going to handle it like literal, right? So you have to have very defensive code, something that you're typically not used to when you're building code against relational structures. So that's a big shift. Taking a look at how you query documents, there's been a movement in the SQL Standard Committee since 2011 to work with more dynamic typed values like JSON. And out of that came an ISO for what's called the SQL JSON integration, which is what we are following in our implementation. So all the querying actually takes place through the SQL engine. There's no proprietary query language like in some of the competition like Mongo. So we use a very strict SQL view on all of your data. And that just means that you can use SQL across any model in order to get access to the data. And that makes it very simple to have a joint view of everything. In general, there are plenty of functions that all start with JSON to interact with your dynamic type structures. These are functions to create JSON on the fly within a SQL statement. We're not going to go into any depth here, but if you're interested, let me know. More important for this conversation here is how we can query a JSON structure or a document into and bring it into a SQL view. Since SQL is always, it requires a schema, it needs to know which path it needs to take in order to make it available as a column engine, and we don't have something like a fixed schema with a collection. We need to tell the SQL engine how we want to map a collection into what is called a virtual table. And this is happening with a function called JSON_table. The JSON_table function can take either a JSON string, it can take a file, it can take also a collection, and make it available as a virtual table so that you can use it in conjunction with any other entities that you have in your SQL query. We're going to take a look at what that looks like in a second in the demo. So in general, the power of this approach is that if you're using SQL for querying all your documents, then you have the same query language for relational and document data. And in the end, that means that you will be able to run hybrid queries, which is a very powerful feature. Now taking a look at InterSystems Iris Cloud Document, this is a new service that's starting an early access phase, like basically today. Officially, it's going to be announced tomorrow at the keynote, so you already have a head start for everybody else, but it's up live and running, so you can start to register for it today. We're going to have a slide at the very end of the presentation. You can take a copy of the QR code and enroll if you're interested. The concept is very simple. It comes with a portal. You can start to ingest your data. You upload a file which contains your JSON documents. You can inspect the contents of that file directly in the portal, get an idea if it's the file that you actually want to import. You import it into a collection, and once you've done this, you can start to take a look at the contents of your document. You can browse the individual documents, take a look at the data. Was it imported correctly? Is it the data that you actually want to work with? And then you can actually run queries in the SQL engine against your collection. Once you've done this, the next thing you actually want to do is, well, write an application against your data sets. And at this point in time, we offer APIs for Java and .NET, APIs for Node.js and Python are in development, so they're going to arrive later in the year. That's the very quick overview, and now I'm going to give you a quick demo. So this is the preview environment for cloud services. This is basically the place where you're going to end up if you enroll for the early access. And you can start and create new deployments here on this side if you click this button and pick out of the lists for all the services that you've enrolled into. So that's at this point in time probably only going to be Cloud Document, unless you're still part of the preview of Cloud SQL, which is unlikely, but that might happen. This is one deployment that I've already created a little bit earlier. This is the name of the deployment. You can see the type of the deployment. It's either InterSystems Iris Cloud Document, or it might be InterSystems Iris Cloud SQL, depending on the type that you've picked. It's currently running. You can see the region it's running in. We can look at the details, get an idea of what it's doing, how is it configured, what's currently going on. Is it a busy system? Is it pretty quiet? How many people are connected to it? What's going on? I can configure it for external connectivity. Does it allow connectivity through the clients? Yes or no? How can I connect to it through TLS? For secure connections, you need to download the certificates so that you can actually negotiate the TLS handshake. And you can get the connection drivers on this page. That page includes all the drivers for SQL and for Cloud Document as well. Going back to the SQL query tools, let's clear this and just start fresh. I've already loaded one collection, and let's explore this a little bit. So we're going to do a select bound star from, and here's the interesting part, we're going to call a function JSON_table, and now we need to point this to a collection that's already stored in the system. The collection is called inspection, and as I told you, the JSON table function can take multiple types of inputs, right? It can take a JSON literal, it can take a file, or it can take a collection. So we need to tell this function what we're giving, what we're handling it, right? So this is done with the format keyword, and we're telling it that we're handing it a collection. So now it's going to actually look for a collection with the name inspection. So if we execute this, it's going to come back and tell us in this collection we have 1,570 documents stored. If you want to take a look at what these documents actually look like, we can do a top 10 star and just get an idea of the contents of each of these documents. You will see a couple of internal properties that we create, like underscore document ID and document version. Those are internal, that's why they start with an underscore. And then you get an idea about all of the different types of properties that those documents have. You can see some of them are actually nested, so they're not on the top level of the document, but they're actually on the level further down. And we can do, let's say, I could also say, I don't want to do a star. I can say, only show me the column battery pass. So you can see I can work with this as with any regular table in theory, right? All of the properties of the document get flattened out and get projected as a column, and I can work with them as in any other regular relational model, if you will, right? So by default, the whole document gets exposed as, or the whole property paths of a document get exposed as columns. What if I want to have a very custom exposure, a very custom projection, and only project very specific paths of my document into a query? There are ways how you can do this as well. Here's one example. So you can see up to this point, this is the query that we know. Now I've added a couple of additional arguments to the JSON table function. First of all, I'm telling it where we want the anchor point to be for all of the coming expressions that we're going to build. Dollar is like the root of my document, so I'm going to start at the root. I could also start at, let's say, root.address, which would mean that every expression that's following is not starting at the top level of my document, but at the property path document.address, right? So I can shift the anchor, if you will. And then I'm adding something which is called the column statement, which is all part of the SQL JSON standard. And now I'm exposing 3 columns, and I'm going to name them inspection start time, battery pass, and engine pass. Each of these have a type. How are we going to map them into the SQL world? All of them are varchars at this point. And I have to tell the system what's the path. How are we going to get to the value of this column? And the path starts off with the dollar character again. And this dollar character is based on whatever the root is that we set here, right? And I'm going to say at the top, we're going to pick the property inspection start time, battery pass, and engine pass. So I could also rename those properties that are stored in the document and rename them in the column. So that's a very flexible way of mapping the schema. If we run this, you can see now we get just those 3 columns exposed, nothing else, right? So now we have a custom mapping. I can change the data type. If I know very specific sets have, let's say, doubles or floats as values, I can specifically map them to that column type to expose them. And those are very common column expressions now. So I can actually do something like where battery pass equals yes. So I can actually take all of these columns and run them in my where clauses or my group bys and start to do more complicated SQL queries on those. So that's a very quick rundown on what you can do on the SQL capabilities. There's obviously much, much more that you can do with this. If you want to know more about it, there's a tech exchange session happening tomorrow where we're actually going to take a look at the APIs for Java and .NET if you're interested. We would like you to give us feedback on all the sessions that you're attending. Let us know what you liked and what we can improve. That's always very valuable for us to bring you the best content that's actually valuable to you. And as I've mentioned, we are running a couple of early access programs right now, of one of which is the InterSystems Iris Cloud document program. So if you're interested, just sign up for it. You can follow that link from the QR code or go to www.intersystems.com/early access programs. That comes with the list, and you can just sign up there. Here's the date for the Tech Exchange meetup happening tomorrow at 5:30. I would be happy if you're interested and come by and take a look at it. If you have any questions, let me know, but I think we're already out of time. So thanks and enjoy the rest of the event.